Yeah. Well, should we make a start? Welcome to everybody to my campaign hub for this general election campaign. I'm immensely proud of this campaign hub, and not just because it's next door to the Liberal Democrats, although that is a bit of fun and it does help. I'm immensely proud of it because I have the most fantastic team here helping me and supporting me in my quest to be the next MP for Edinburgh West. And part of that, I'm absolutely delighted that our Deputy First Minister, John Swinney's agreed to join us this evening, and also a long-standing colleague of mine, Ivan McKee, who is really a very much respected international businessman and speaker around the economics of what we're trying to do in Scotland. So this evening's all going to be focused about that, because we know there's political messages, but we also know that these political messages translate into real issues for people on a day-to-day basis, and understanding why so acutely austerity economics has been failing by even the very same measures that the Westminster government is applying to them really helps promote our case. So I'd like to introduce John Swinney to you first of all to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and it's a great pleasure to be here tonight and to essentially return to my roots. I was brought up about, I don't know, 500 yards down the road from here, and my parents have lived in the same house in Carrick now that they have lived in for the entirety of, my goodness, the 59 years of their married life, my goodness. So this area is very familiar to me, and I know it very well, and I'm delighted that my friend Michelle Thomson is the aspiring parliamentary candidate here in Edinburgh West and working so hard to win this constituency for the Scottish National Party and to make sure that she can represent effectively the views and the needs and the aspirations of people in this community. Now, Michelle said that the discussion tonight is on the issue of austerity economics and the implications for our community, and what I want to do in addressing that question is to look at just some of the reasons why I think we've got to take a different course in this election campaign, and how we vote on the 7th of May, and how we've got to get to a different outcome, and to consider also some of the things that we've done as a government and why I think they've been helpful to the development of the economy in the context of a challenging financial set of circumstances, and then look at what the election outcome can deliver for Scotland in terms of improving our economy. First of all, on the merits, the whys and wherefores of austerity economics, Michelle made the point that by any set of measures that we happen to look at, austerity economics has failed. We warned in 2010, when the UK government took office, when the Conservative and Liberal coalition was created, that there was a danger if you reduced public expenditure to the extent that was undertaken, you would actually stifle growth, and we were told that we were wrong. If you actually look at the performance of growth in the economy, what's actually happened compared to what was planned to happen back in 2010, you will find in 2011, 2012 and 2013 that the economic growth that was planned in the economy didn't materialise. And essentially over that 3-year period, the economy lost 4% of the growth that was expected to take place within that period. And these might sound like dry numbers, but essentially they relate to the prospects that individuals would have had and experienced within the economy over that period of time. People would have been denied opportunities for employment and for productive activity within our economy that they should reasonably have been expecting to achieve given those forecasts back in 2010, and they didn't materialise because of the impact of austerity economics. And if I can pinpoint one thing which I think had the effect of depressing economic activity, it was a decision of the UK government to reduce the capital budget of the UK by about 33% in one go. And we argued very strongly against that, and indeed I took a number of measures in our own financial programme where I shifted resources out of our operational budget into our capital budget, where I took forward measures like the investment in our schools estate and our hospital estate through the Scottish Futures Trust, just to make sure that we had as much investment in capital building projects as we possibly could do, whether that was transport connections, schools, hospitals, housing developments around the country. So all of these things we tried to prioritise, despite the fact that the UK government had decided to reduce public expenditure, and particularly capital expenditure to that extent. And if you actually look at the economic performance of Scotland over that time, what you will find is that we actually managed for a period to sustain a stronger level of economic performance than was envisaged at that particular time and with the estimates that were made. But ultimately, the effect of austerity began to temper the economic performance of the Scottish economy. And it's only now that we're beginning to see some of the growth in the economy that we could reasonably have expected to see happening. And this morning we confirmed the latest estimates for gross domestic product in Scotland, where the economic performance and economic growth in the Scottish economy is broadly comparable to economic growth in the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, if you go back 15 years, you couldn't have said that about Scotland, because Scotland actually performed more poorly than the rest of the UK in terms of economic growth and economic activity. And what I deduce from that is that if we have the ability to take different decisions in Scotland according to the needs and the priorities of people in Scotland, we can deliver a stronger economic performance as a result. And those factors are inherent in the discussion that we're having around about the election campaign. So, in my view, the austerity agenda since 2010 has caused a greater degree of pain than really should have been the case or could ordinarily have been expected in this context. And what we have had to do is to act to try to temper some of the implications and the impact of all of those measures. Now, as that relates now to the election campaign, we have a very clear choice, and SNP MPs who are elected to the Westminster Parliament, and I sincerely hope that Michelle is one of them, will be going into the Westminster Parliament post-election with a very clear set of priorities, and one of them is to bring austerity to an end. And to do that by investing in public spending to encourage growth within our economy, and as a consequence of the encouragement by public expenditure of growth in our economy, to see the improvement in tax revenues and finances that can contribute towards the wider public good as a consequence. So at the heart of what SNP MPs will argue for post-election will be that different economic agenda, and we've made it quite clear that as we advance that agenda, we will ensure that our MPs use their voting strength and their muscle within the House of Commons to secure that agenda in the post-election outcome. And of course, as we can see from the opinion polls, as we can see from the dynamics of the election, there's every possibility that the votes of SNP MPs will actually be crucial and fundamental to the design of the governance of the United Kingdom after this election, and we have an opportunity to shape that, to shape the agenda in the interests of the people of Scotland and to improve their economic prospects and their economic opportunities. So in doing that, we would want to see an economic agenda building on what the Scottish Government has done to date. So in the midst of all of this financial difficulty, we've still managed to create in Scotland around about a £4 billion capital investment programme every year in the Scottish economy, and that's the level of capital investment that I think is required to update our infrastructure and to ensure that we are fuelling our economic recovery. And that's spread across a range of projects. The most visible in this neck of the woods is the Queensferry Crossing, which on a daily basis I see growing and strengthening and demonstrably showing the impact of capital expenditure within the economy. But we take those projects forward across a range of different sectors within the economy. So we want to see the choices of the UK government building on that record of investment in the Scottish economy. I'd also want us to see measures taken to complement some of the other steps that we've taken on supporting the small business community. One of the measures that we introduced back in 2008 was a reduction in business rates for small and medium-sized companies. And we've now got 96,000 companies in Scotland that are either paying a lower level of business rates or no business rates at all as a consequence of decisions of the Scottish Government. And as I go around the country, and just yesterday I was over in Shawlands in the Glasgow South constituency, and I met with a local business association there who were making it absolutely clear how significant that business rates reduction scheme had been in supporting the development of the economy in that locality. So the type of measures we want to see taken would be to legislate to improve the requirements and obligations placed on companies to pay suppliers on time, to ensure prompt payment. The government pays 98% of its invoices within 10 days of them being received by government. We should have those standards in general, because we all know the significance of cash within the economy and the importance of cash and the survivability of individual businesses. So part of the measures we'd want to take would be to encourage that type of payment culture to assist the small business community. And then thirdly, we'd also want to see a partnership created with government around improving the quality and the value of employment within Scotland, principally by encouraging more and more employers, where it's practical and possible, to pay their employees a living wage and to improve the productive value and significance of the work that employees are undertaking. So these are the types of practical measures that we would argue for as part of the agenda that we would help to shape in the agenda of the United Kingdom Parliament post-election. And finally, the other area where SNP MPs will be actively pursuing the opportunities of exerting their influence after the election is to make sure that we secure for the Scottish Parliament the type of economic powers that can strengthen the performance of Scotland as a country. I come back to my first point. If you go back 15 years, Scotland's economic performance generally was poorer than the performance of the rest of the United Kingdom. And today, the gross domestic product statistics in Scotland show that our economic performance is broadly comparable to the rest of the UK. And if you look at the measures of productivity within the Scottish economy, 15 years ago, Scotland was essentially about 6% less productive than the UK, and we are now by and large on a par of productivity levels with the rest of the United Kingdom. So we have to, what we've been able to do by exercising different powers and responsibilities in Scotland is to improve the economic performance of the country. And my argument is if we've been successful in doing that over a range of different areas of policies like education, skills, housing, infrastructure development and economic and business development, we can do that by some of the other measures we're able to take forward to strengthen the economic performance of Scotland in other areas, particularly around employment policy, competition policy and wider economic and taxation policy. So SNP MPs will argue to secure for Scotland the range of economic powers that will enable us to strengthen the performance of the country. Now, I went through at the tail end of last year the participation in the Smith Commission, the attempt to look at the post-referendum climate with the other parties to identify the powers that were necessary for Scotland. And there's a range of welcome new powers coming to the Scottish Parliament, but they are not nearly the comprehensive economic powers that are required to ensure we can transform the country. So for me, there is work to be undertaken in the next Parliament, which is about securing for Scotland the range of powers and responsibilities that will enable us to strengthen the economic performance of Scotland and provide real opportunities to the people. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because we have to set the conditions whereby we enable every individual in Scotland to realise their full potential and to be able to participate in our economy. That's what this is all about. It's about ensuring that Scotland is able to create the opportunities for our people to thrive and to benefit as a consequence. A great deal has been achieved with the powers of devolution, but over the last few years we've been hampered by the effects of the austerity policy of the United Kingdom government. This is an opportunity in the election on the 7th of May to move on from that agenda, to ensure that we secure first the necessary investment in our public services and our public infrastructure, but also that we secure the powers and the responsibilities that enable Scotland to take the decisions that will transform the prospects of our people. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because this is our opportunity to ensure that we create the conditions in which the people of Scotland can flourish, they can thrive, and they can find the opportunities to which they are entitled. And that'll be best served in this neck of the woods by the election of Michelle Thomson as the MP for Edinburgh West. And good luck in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, John, and that framing out of where we're trying to proceed. I'd now like to introduce you to Ivan McKee, who's going to give us a talk about austerity economics.
Indeed I am, yeah. But before we start that, just want to do something else. A few weeks ago, Tony Blair was in the news because he decided to donate some money to support some of the Labour campaigns up and down the country. You might remember there was 5 of them in Scotland. There was a couple of them actually said they didn't want his money. So when I saw that, I thought, I should do something to kind of compare with that. And as I say, 5 of the constituents that Tony Blair gave money to were in Scotland. So I decided, you've heard of the Blair Witch project. Well, I kind of kicked off the Blair Match project and decided to pick 5 Scottish constituencies to donate £1,000 to as well. Michelle's constituency is one of them, not least because this was one of the constituencies that Blair's put his money into, believe it or not, and also because it's Michelle, who I think would make a fabulous MP. So without any further ado, I've got a cheque for £1,000.
Right, well, thank you.
So,
it's all going very well. If anyone else wants to join in, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Or just do it online. But can somebody put the lights off? Yeah.
Aye.
We got another post for that one, sorry.
Another
post.
Right, okay, another photo with the...
Don't you have a giant check out?
Wow,
No,
there's a story about that.
Yes.
There we go. That's it. See, that'll be in Twitter now.
Yeah.
Well done, sorry.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, right, yes.
Right, can you all see this? Oh, it looks great in the with the lights off. Oh, wrong way. Okay. Oh, here we go, that's working. Okay, thanks for coming along tonight, and thanks very much for John, who stolen all my good lines. In fact, no, seriously, it's great to hear it from the man that's actually done it, because I've been preaching this stuff. But when you hear John talk about it, and it all falls into place, and it's great to hear it. What I'm going to talk about tonight for about 20 minutes or so is, first of all, why are we here politically? Then I'm going to talk about austerity, what it is exactly from an economic point of view, because that's important to understand. A bit about SNP economic policy for the UK as a whole, what we bring to the party in terms of Scotland, and then a wee bit about what's going to happen next, Westminster and Holyrood. So first of all, about me, I've been 30 years in manufacturing, 10 years running my own businesses, spent a lot of time internationally, a lot of it in small independent European countries that have done very well, thank you very much, which led me to recognise that an independent Scotland would be a very successful proposition. Campaigned in the referendum, came to the conclusion a couple of years ago that independence made sense from an economic and a political point of view, got involved in campaigning in the referendum, and then after the referendum was over, made the decision to stay involved, joined the SNP, and I'm also a director of the Commonweal with Robin McAlpine. So in terms of why we're here, people kind of forget that there was a no vote, and what I mean by that is people down south talk about why are these Scots wanting to come down and take part in our Westminster politics. Well, if there'd been a yes vote, we'd be off doing something else now. As David Cameron said, well, Scotland's an equal member of the family of nations, and the consequence of that is that the SNP is going to play a constructive role in politics of Westminster, and it's important to stress that because very often you hear the commentators down south worried about a destructive SNP influence on Westminster, but in actual fact it's going to be quite the opposite, because you've got to remember Scotland needs a strong UK, whether we're part of it or whether we're not part of it. If it was an independent Scotland, the rest of the UK would still be our largest trading partner for the foreseeable future, so it's very important that even in that context the UK's got a strong economy, certainly stronger than it has had under the coalition government. Which brings me on to talk about austerity, and there's really two parts to this, and it's important to recognise that. When you say to people austerity, they'll say, we don't like it, it's horrible, it's bad, and then you say, well, what is it? Explain to me what it is. And they go, well, yeah, it's the cuts, we don't like the cuts, cuts in public services, cuts in jobs, it's a bad thing. And all of that's true and very, very valuable, but there's really two parts to it, and they reinforce each other very much. The second part is the economic theory, because the reality is the austerity model, as John very clearly explained, in theory it doesn't work, and in practice it doesn't work, and it's been debunked so many times over the decades, but it keeps rearing its ugly head as an economic model. A quote from our favourite politician of all times. Okay. I remember her saying that, which shows you how old I am. Okay. And it was utter rubbish then, and it's even more so now. Because it's important to recognise, if you're running a household with your personal budget, you've got money comes in, you get money goes out, at the end of the month you've either got more or less than you started with, and it's a very linear relationship. It's quite a simple, straightforward process. There's a fundamental difference to running a national economy, because when you've got a national economy you've got this feedback loop, which effectively means that a lot of what you class as government expenditure comes back round and comes back in as government income, and it's important to recognise that and the impact that that has on growth. The whole thing's very much coherent and works together. So what's in the investment loop? Well, or the feedback loop, well, you've got government investment, which creates jobs. Depending on the type of investment, it'll create potentially more jobs, and that takes people off benefit, so that's less government expenditure. It means they're earning money, paying taxes, more government income. They've got some money to spend, they go and spend that money, spend it in their local businesses typically, which means those businesses grow and thrive and employ more people, and so on and so forth, and the whole process goes into this positive spiral, and that's how you get growth going in the economy, priming the pump and government leading the way on investment expenditure. What we've had over the last 5 years is the opposite, as John's explained. We went into this spiral where the cuts led to less government income, which caused a problem in terms of the government finances, the deficit not coming down anything like was planned, but also caused the social problems through austerity that we've seen over the last 5 years. So I'm going to take a step back, and John mentioned this, and here's some graphs to kind of back it up, and it's good to see that my number crunching ties with John's perception of what's actually happened. If you go back to June 2010, George Osborne presented his budget, and he laid out his plans for the next 5 years, what they were going to spend, what the government income was going to be, what the deficit was going to be, what was going to happen to the debt. And on the deficit, he said he would get it down almost to zero. I mean, that's the deficit including capital expenditure, but just the current deficit that we're going to go down to effectively zero by now. But in reality, it's a long way short of that, sitting at about 90 billion still, the deficit in the last year. So that is the deficit's the difference between government income and government expenditure. So missing his target by a long way. What that means is that the debt has continued to go up and up and up and up and up. Each year they're adding more deficit onto the debt pile, and it's going up and up and up, and that rate of increase hasn't slowed. So if you look at that, you would say, well, what's happened is that he always hasn't cut enough. If he'd cut more, the deficit would be coming down faster. Well, you actually look at what's happened. Again, the blue line is the planned number, and the red line is the actual number. He's actually cut slightly more than the planned. Spend is actually down slightly more than was planned back in 2010. So he's hit the spend number. What's going on? Important to recognise that you've got to put that line also, and that line kind of looks flat. You've got to put it as a percentage of the economy, and that really shows you up what they've done in terms of public spending, cutting out of the economy. So the amount of government expenditure as a percent of the economy, you take into account inflation, etc., is come down by quite a few points. So what's happening? If they've missed the deficit target, debt's still going up, the spending cuts are being delivered. So what's the problem? Why is the deficit still going up? Well, it brings us back to the theory, and what the theory says, of course, is if you cut the government expenditure, you're automatically cutting the government income as well. And if you look at the graph on income, again, the blue line was the plan, and the red line is the actual, and you see quite a disconnect there. The whole reason the deficit's been missed, target's been missed, is because what's happened on the income side. The government income has been significantly lower than George Osborne planned it was going to be back in 2010. Now it's a complicated graph because it's one I stole for somebody, and it's not one of mine, but you only need to look at two lines. The top line at the bottom line, because this goes into the next level of detail and it explains why, one of the reasons why that income's down, and also kind of some of the social impacts behind it as well, because I said at the start, the social impact and the economic impact go hand in hand through this austerity process. If you think about people in the economy, everybody's paying tax and national insurance. If you're not earning very much, you're not paying any tax and national insurance. As you go further up the income scale, you're paying more and more and more as you go up the different tax bands. This is a graph of the average tax plus national insurance take across the economy in the UK. And back in 2010 it was 34%. Some people on 20% plus a national insurance, some people paying no income tax, some people paying 40-45% or whatever. The average was 34%. The projection over the 5 years was for that number to increase. Was for that number to increase to 36%, which would have meant tax revenue going up. Now the reason that would increase, it was a daft assumption, because it's always increased, and the reason it's always increased through history is because over time people get better paid jobs, they move up the tax brackets, they get a promotion, etc, 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 and in general people over time, their salaries go up, their standard of living goes up, and they're paying more tax. But in reality it's actually gone the opposite direction. It's actually dropped down to 33%, and that's a consequence of, because of austerity, people losing their jobs, getting less well-paid jobs, or wages being stagnant over that period of time. So that's quite a stark indication of some of the situation that's driven part of the government reduction in income over that time. And John mentioned investment, because government expenditure can be expenditure to keep services running, or it can be investment to go build schools, hospitals, roads, railways, bridges, for example, etc, etc, etc. And as John mentioned, significant cut in investment spending back at the start of the Parliament, and stayed at a low level since then. And investment spending has got a very beneficial effect in the economy in terms of creating jobs quite quickly, and when you cut it, it's obviously got the opposite effect. So they've done, the model says if you do that, that's what happens to the economy, and that's what they've done, and that's what's happened. The income is completely way off target. But as I mentioned at the start, there's two tracks to this. It's not just the economy stupid, to paraphrase Clinton. There's much more to it than that, and a statistic I didn't believe when I first saw it, went and checked it a couple of times, but it's absolutely true. Trussell Trust numbers 400% increase in the use of Scottish food banks over the last year, which is obviously the social impact of what's going on. Investment, good for growth and good for fixing the imbalance in the economy and society, and that comes down to what you call trickle down or trickle up. The austerity economics, the right-wing economics, have you believe that if you give a few rich people a lot more money, they'll go and spend it and invest it, and that'll help the economy grow. The reality is it's quite the opposite. The best way to get the economy going is to give more people a small amount of extra money to a lot of people at the bottom, because if you've not got a lot of money and you get a bit more, you're going to go to spend it and spend it in your local businesses. If you've already got a significant amount of money and you get a bit more, you're going to invest it, maybe offshore, you're going to buy something that's probably a big expensive import, etc, etc. So the most effective way to get the economy going is to redistribute that income to that extent, and that very much goes against the theory behind the austerity model. The alternative, Westminster austerity, has failed in the alternative that promotes growth and fairness. So a very clear and succinct view on what needs to be done. And the numbers behind that, the SNP economic policy for the UK, I remember we're part of the UK, there was a no vote and we're still here, and we've got every right to make our voice heard in terms of the economy. 0.5% increase in spending, which doesn't sound a lot, okay? When you add it up over the 5 years, it's 180 billion, which does sound a lot, but in the context of the UK economy, which is obviously a very big economy. But the other way to look at it is, all it does, that extra 35 billion or so a year, takes investment levels, if you remember the investment graph, just takes them back to where it was at the start of the crash, once you take inflation, etc. into account. So all it's doing is going back to where we were pre-crash. In actual fact, the economic theory, the Keynesian theory, says you're supposed to actually invest more, the government's supposed to invest more when the economy starts going down. So that graph should actually be going up, not down, because the government's got to take some of that burden, prime the pump and get business moving, and then when business starts to invest on its own account, and times are better, the government can step back a bit and stop investing so much in the economy. So they've kind of crashed the thing by going the wrong way. And all the SNP economic policy does at UK level is takes that investment spending back to roughly where it would have been if we hadn't had those cuts. So if people say it's a crazy, daft, over-ambitious investment plan, it's absolutely not. If anything, it's probably you could actually do a bit more. I'm going to talk about the Scottish Government, and again John's talked about this, and this is some graphs on it. This is looking at, if you take 2008-9 as 100, or 2009-10 as 100%, what's been the percentage reduction in investment expenditure at a UK level and at a Scottish level. Now remember, the Scottish Government's very much at the mercy of the money coming from Westminster. When Westminster stops spending in the UK level, the Scottish Government gets correspondingly less money. But if you look at what's happened, the UK has been cutting that investment expenditure. The Scottish Government and John have managed to keep that, well not to the level it was at before, but a significantly smaller reduction than was implemented across the whole of the UK. And if you look at the impact on that, sorry for the picture, John, if you look at the impact across that, more investment in Scotland, employment and unemployment are in a better position in Scotland than the UK, and our growth level is actually, as John mentioned, better comparatively, significantly so than it has been historically. All done in the context of a balanced budget without borrowing, and again that begs the question, how much more could we do with more powers in Scotland, be that moving towards full fiscal autonomy or ultimately full independence. Just a minute on Labour's policy, because Labour would have you believe that the Tories are the bad guys and they're the good guys, although Jim Murphy the last couple of days doesn't seem to know which direction he's facing in, and it's been quite entertaining to watch. But they're caught very much in the headlights of this horrible word triangulation, which is the theory that got the Blair governments elected, and they're trying to implement, have continued to try to implement that, which basically means you figure out where your main opponent is, the Tories, you figure out where the centre ground is, and you try and stay between your opponent and the centre ground. So the Tories go to the right, you go to the right as well, because the theory is the centre ground will vote for you in that scenario. And that kind of explains why Labour keeps tracking as close to the Tories as they can at a UK level, because the theory says that's how you capture the centre ground, and that's how you win elections, like Blair did. The problem, of course, the Labour Party have got is in Scotland there is a credible alternative on the left, which they don't have to the same extent in the rest of the UK. So it means in Scotland they just don't know what to do, because they can't deviate from UK policy, but they can't have a stick to it because it exposes them for being too close to the Tories. And the symptom of that was back in January, when George Osborne laid the trap in Westminster for austerity plans for the next 5 years, and the Labour MPs saw no alternative but to troop through and vote with the Tories to implement another 30 billion of cuts, making austerity even worse over the future Parliament. Right, so you know this guy. This is the guy that turns up at your party with a can of special brew and wants to come in and drink all your best malts. I mean, that's how they look at us, right, down south, to a large extent. You listen to some of the characters in the Westminster media bubble. But the reality is Scotland contributes more than our fair share to UK income and to UK exports, both very, very important to the UK economy. And not only have we got a political right to make our voice heard at Westminster, we've got every right to go down there and make our voice heard from an economic point of view as well. Economic activity in Scotland 15% higher than the UK average per person, GDP per person over recent years. Tax revenue higher per person in Scotland than the UK average. Positive balance of payments in Scotland contributes about 40 billion to UK exports. That's the graph that shows the differential, if you haven't seen it, between Scotland's income and the UK income. 2 lines for every year going back to 1980. The higher line, the darker line, is Scotland's income tax generated per person into the exchequer. The lighter line, the smaller line, the UK average. In every one of those years, Scotland generating more income per person than the UK average. This is a graph of where economic activity is in the UK, where the wealth is generated, if you like, by part of the UK. The darker the colour, the higher the GDP per part of the UK. So if you look at where the wealth is generated in the UK, London, along the south of England, a wee bit in the north west of England, northeast of Scotland, and down across the central belt, that's where the wealth is generated. If you looked at that picture, just Scotland and the rest of the UK, Scotland with a darker colour, their GDP being, as I said, 15% higher. That's where the money comes from. And that's where the wealth ends up. That's the UK Office of National Statistics graph showing the wealthiest households in the UK. They class a wealthy household as having total assets of almost £1 million, including the value of your house, your car, your savings, your pension, your yacht, whatever, all added together. It's more than £1 million they class you as a wealthy household. The south of England, more than 13% of households in that category. Less the higher north you go, Scotland less than 7% of households classed as wealthy households. So if you flick back between those two graphs, it kind of answers the paradox of why, if on paper, in theory, Scotland generates that wealth, why do large parts of it not look very wealthy compared to the south of England? That's where the money comes from, that's where it ends up. So, and in terms of exports, the other important factor, Scotland's got a positive balance of payments. We export significantly more than we import. We contribute 40 billion to UK exports. The graph of the UK's balance of payments, a red line being zero, the blue line being the negative balance of payments. Every year the UK exporting a lot less than it imports, and actually getting worse in the last few years. And doesn't need to be like that. International comparisons, the UK at the bottom, the green line at the bottom, minus 3-4-5%. A whole bunch of countries at plus 4 or 5%. Denmark, Germany, Sweden, and there's Norway at the top. They're doing pretty well in terms of balance of payments. So balance of payments is important because you need to be an export nation to pay your way in the world. Scotland, without Scottish exports, the UK would be in a significantly worse condition than it is now. So we do contribute a lot, and the UK's broad shoulders in that sense, not so very broad after all. And my favourite graph, not because it tells a good story, it tells a bad story about my background in manufacturing. It's a very important story going back to 1970, percentage of manufacturing in a number of industrialised countries in Europe, all hovering about the 25 to 30% mark, the UK almost 30%. That's the UK one, the one that comes down to barely 10% over that period of time. Other European countries, the reduction's been far, far less dramatic. They've had policies, we were talking earlier about a couple of folk that have spent a long time in Germany, their policies on industry and maintaining their exports and maintaining their manufacturing sectors. In the Scandinavian countries I've worked in, the same story. It can be done in a Western European economy, but you've got the willingness to do it. The UK government doesn't have that, hence the huge problem with exports. Scotland's got the opportunity under full fiscal autonomy and independence to focus on reindustrialising and exporting more manufactured products. So in summary, austerity model broken, the UK broad shoulders, anything but the UK economy unbalanced and unfair, and the SNP can make a positive difference to UK economic policy as well as enhancing Scottish interests. Just want to take a minute to tell the wee Norway story, which some of you may have heard, but I'll tell you it again. And this kind of just shows up there. And this kind of shows up a wee bit about the aspirational side of it, because we sometimes lose focus on the big picture and where we're going with all of this, and we'll look at numbers from jails for this year or last year. But it's important to understand it in context of what the potential here is. And it's a wee story about the Prime Minister in Norway that goes for a walk along the fjord one day, as you do, and he stumbles across a magic lamp and he picks up and gives it a rub, and the genie pops out and the genie says to him, "I'll give you some wishes to make Norway a better country." And the Prime Minister says, that's a difficult one. We're the richest country in the world. They measure these things and tell us we're just about the happiest country in the world. There's no poverty to speak of. Everybody's got a good enough job and leisure time to enjoy it. It's difficult to think of anything that would make us better country. And the Prime Minister, the genie says, well, you need to think of something. So the Prime Minister says, well, I can think of a few things. He said, for example, we've got a great economy in Norway, but it's quite narrow. We've got our oil industry, we've got our fisheries, but not much else. We've got this national drink called aquavit. We love it, but nobody else has ever heard of it. It'd be great if that was a global international brand and people from Shanghai to Chicago couldn't get enough of this stuff and would pay stupid money to take it off our hands, and we were the only people that could make this stuff. That would be a nice wee earner for our economy. We could do with some of that. He says, yeah, We can do that for you. Said we've got a problem in the language, we speak Norwegian and nobody else in the world speaks Norwegian, so if we want to go and do business anywhere, we've got to learn another language. It'd be great if you just made Norwegian the world international business language, so we got off a plane in Tokyo or Brazil to do business or to go on holiday and we just speak Norwegian and everybody understands what we're talking about. That would make life a wee bit easier. So yeah, we can do that for you. So we've got a beautiful country in Norway, but it's really big. It's a long way north to south, and in the winter it's full of mountains. Building infrastructure is horribly expensive, and in the winter it's a nightmare. We've got snow up to here 3 months of the year. It's minus 35. Just to get to your work in the morning, you've got to get the snowplough out. It'd be nice if we had the same population and the same natural resources in a country that was a quarter the size and with some nice mild winters, so we didn't have to worry about getting the snowplough out in the morning. That would make life a wee bit easier. I said, yeah, we can do that for you as well. He said, we've got a problem when we export from Norway. We've got to go through 2 other countries to get to our main markets in Central Europe. It'd be nice if we had just bolted a big land mass of 60 million people onto our southern border there. They all spoke Norwegian. They all want to buy our food and our drink and our energy and our oil and our aquavit. We wouldn't want to be ruled by them, you understand. We just want to have them as a friendly trading neighbour and a big market for our exports. That would make life a wee bit easier. It'd be nice if we had 4 of the top 200 universities in the world in Norway. It'd be great if we had an industrial heritage going back 200 years and people were very respectful of our engineers and scientists and all the great things they'd invented over the centuries, and respected our technology companies because of that. And it'd be good if we had a stronger brand than that, a stronger international brand. If people recognised our national poet and he was celebrated every year in Washington and Moscow, and people instantly recognised our national dress, that would make life a wee bit easier in terms of promoting our international brand, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. And when you sit there and think about it, we've got a lot of advantages over the likes of Norway. The No campaign used to laugh at us when we said we aspire one day to be like Norway. You've got to remember in 1970 Norway was poorer than Scotland. They get dealt a couple of cards, they've played them very well and they've ended up where they are. But we can do that and a lot more, and Norway should give them the advantages we've got in terms of our history, the language, the natural resources, where we are, where we've come from, our connections with the world, etc, etc, etc. We've got an ideal set of circumstances to build a very special country here. And I told this story in the past a few times, and there was twice somebody put their hand up at the Q&A and said, I'm from Norway. And I thought, oh dear, I'm going to get called out here. But in both cases they said, you're absolutely right. There's a huge, Norway was bankrupt in the late 60s, and they've managed to do well, and we could do an awful lot more. So just to finish off, I'm going to talk about the home leg and the away leg, the double header coming up. Next year we've got the Holyrood elections. Important that we're able to deal with the new powers that come back, to translate those into things that make a difference for the people of Scotland, and also to demonstrate that we can deal with a much broader range of economic powers, to give people the confidence. And the cringe is reducing, the Scottish cringe is less and less. The referendum's done a great job in building up the confidence of people in the country. We need to do more of that, showing we can work with more powers in the Scottish Government over the next few years. A very important part of that, so that when the time comes to the next referendum, the step is much smaller and people feel more confident about taking it. And then to the away leg coming up very fast now, going down there arguing for more powers and making sure we get those back, moving as close as we can towards full fiscal autonomy. And it's very interesting, if you look at during the referendum there was Project Fear. Well, what you see now is very much the fear on the other side, in the Westminster commentators and the London media bubble coming on day after day and worrying about what the SNP MPs are going to do when they land in Westminster. But frankly, how dare they come out and say we don't have the right to take part in that democratic process? And you listen to some of the stuff that gets said about Scottish MPs, SNP MPs going south in May. Because the reality is we're going to send a strong team down there. They're not going down there to become part of the establishment, as has happened through history with Scottish political forces going south back through the centuries and settling down in London and becoming part of the establishment. They're going down there, as Alex Salmon says, to shake the establishment to the core, and they're not going down there to settle down, they're going down there to settle up. We're going to send a strong team down there in May. Michelle's going to be part of that team 21 days left to go. Scary few days left to go. A lot of work to be done. I'm sure you're all doing it, but get out there, campaign, and let's bring the votes home. Thanks very much for your time.
I think there's probably some questions that everyone has. I mean, I know I've got one immediately. It's been very much in the news, this use of the term full fiscal autonomy and scary biscuits, and of course we've been told, you know, this deficit of 7.6 billion in terms of the IFS report. Both of you. We've got a take on that, because it's not something that scares me, but I think it's important that everyone understands the perspective on that. So over to you, both of you, if I could.
I think the first thing I'd say is that the people have to understand clearly what full fiscal autonomy is about. It's about having the economic powers and responsibilities to take decisions that are entirely in the interests of the Scottish economy, and to be able to base those decisions on the judgments that arise. You know, what both Ivan and I have set out is the fact that there are a number of examples where we've been able to demonstrate improved economic performance as a consequence of taking decisions according to the needs of people in Scotland. So that's the kind of point of principle about all of this. The second is to look at the sort of the IFS analysis and the accusation that's been said to us. The first thing to say is that fiscal autonomy is a change within the United Kingdom, so it doesn't happen overnight. So the 7.6 billion figure refers to if the journey was completed today, which is not what's the proposal, because that's, you know, it's patently obvious we're not going to be fiscally autonomous in the next at the present moment. So all of these changes have to be applied and implemented over a period of time, and the changes that are getting made, for example, on tax powers just now, they were conceived of in 2009, they've been implemented in 2016, and there's a 3-year transition period, and you have to have that type of transition period when you're operating those type of internal changes within the United Kingdom. And the third point is that when you exercise economic powers, and the IFS report actually makes this point, you're able to deliver different outcomes and different prospects. So what all of this analysis fails to do is it fails to take into account any difference in economic performance as a consequence of the decisions that we would take. It's an entirely static analysis, so it doesn't take into account the dynamics of how the economy can be changed and how we can improve economic performance as a consequence. And those are all the points that people have to think about in the context of the delivery of fiscal autonomy and greater fiscal responsibility within Scotland. Now, we're in a situation, we're going to become more fiscally autonomous as a consequence of the Smith Commission. We're going to become more fiscally autonomous as a consequence of the Calman Commission. I've just had to legislate for 2 taxes where we've replaced UK taxes with distinctly Scottish taxes. We've taken the responsibility and we take the risk of those taxes. So this process of actually working our way through to becoming fiscally autonomous is actually underway today, and it's been legislated for by all of the UK parties in the process.
Just this question of fiscal austerity. People would be interested to know where it came from. It came from the United States financial sector. Okay, they say it's the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund that were saying it. But who were they? They were set up by the United States Financial Department after the war, because the United States were the only country with money. So they followed the United States sector. And with them, they're doing it, and it's going exactly the same way. The richer are not having any penalties. The CEOs are now earning 300% higher than the workerman. And it's just going all that way, and they cannot see beyond that, because the American financial sector, through the IMF and the World Bank, have just got it out to people, they could understand and say, well, the bankers caused the problem. Why don't, when they have one of these little errors that happened, they find something going wrong, why do they put the money, find the money, on the bank? They should take it off this pot of money that is there paying the bankers.
I think there's a number of the analysis is, you know, the origins of austerity are absolutely correct. I think there's obviously alternative approaches that you can then put in a historical context, like the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was about essentially investment in public infrastructure and public good to aid economic recovery. So, you know, I'm not claiming some great new novel thinking that I've just invented. You know, there's plenty of other rationales that would set out how, as a consequence of investment, you do exactly what Ivan was talking about, of creating that positive feedback loop where the consequences of investment bring you benefit within the economy as a result. And you can see that from, if you look at what we tried to do with government procurement, for example, where we're trying to embed on the Queensferry crossing. I was just looking at some data this morning on the volume of activity that is undertaken, that is work going into locally based SMEs in Scotland to encourage that positive feedback loop within the economy. So I think that there are clearly competing ways of economic thinking that you can analyse this. The other point I'd like to pick up is the point that you made about differentials in salaries between, let's say, the average kind of employment and leadership roles. Now, when I was, when I started off my working life, the relationship between average salaries and senior leadership salaries might have been a factor of probably maybe 8 or 10 to 1. Now, it'll be 300 to 1. And that's absolutely, it's unjustifiable. You think to yourself, I often think to myself, what do you actually do between 9 and 5 that actually merits that kind of remuneration? What is it that you actually do in those periods? And then you also see in the banking sector some of the people who are in that financial bracket behaving absolutely abominably.
Why aren't they being punished?
Well, that's a very good question. Why not, eh? Because if you look at some of the stuff, some of the HSBC activity is criminal. Well, I think it's criminal. Whether it's not up to me to make a judgment of these things, it's prosecuting authorities to make those judgments. But that is, so there's an issue there that has to be addressed, that people have to be held to account. But there's also a very deep issue in our society about what is the proper relationship between an average salary and a leadership salary. Because I'm unable to understand what is the justification. I can't justify to you the relationship between, 300 to 1. I just think that's preposterous.
I think that's only in the financial sectors. I have a small business and I'm actually paying myself less than I'm paying my employees so that I can survive. I feel like I'm a hamster. I feel like I'm running and not getting anywhere. I've had my business for 12 years now and I'm getting paid the same as I got paid 10 years ago, just so that I can make ends meet. My college leavers are getting paid what I paid, what I get paid. So people think I'm loaded because I've got my own business, and I'm not at all.
But that's some of the kind of the sacrifices that people in business make to make sure that they're, and what you do, without what you're doing, there would be a number of other people not able to make an economic contribution as a consequence.
When is it going to get easier? And that's the thing. I mean, I didn't think independence was going to wave a magic wand, but I have children, and I thought, well, that was creating a better future. I've already weathered a huge storm, so I can weather a bit more. But when you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, when you're just like constantly going, okay, right, I'll just do this, and I'll just do this, and I'll just do this. It's difficult, So to have a little bit of more fairness, and a little bit more going into the economy and people spending. I mean, I've got a beauty salon, so it's people's expendable income, and they've got the same expendable income as they had 6 years ago. No, they don't. They've got say they had £200 6 years ago, they've not got £200 anymore because the cost of living's gone up, the wages haven't gone up, and they've not got bonuses and they've not got anything like that. So now they've only got 50 pence to spend, which means they're spending less in that shop.
I think that's the nature of what we
Like
arguing for is the importance of trying to encourage greater economic activity, and you've got to start driving that more aggressively, and that's what the investment climate that we're arguing for helps to do, and it helps to move the economy.
Yeah.
John, could I just ask you something there? And it was something Ivan said as well. It comes back to what you were saying. You mentioned trickle up. The normal people outside that don't come here and listen to you, or they hear.
We're abnormal, are we?
I mean, they go on with their lives. They've got other worries. They think they can't change anything. But they're the people who are going to come out and vote. If we're out there, we're talking to them. They're asking us the questions, and they throw this thing back to us. Oh, 7.6 billion that Scotland goes down the drain, because that's what they're hearing all the time, and there's nothing there. So the trickle up situation is the easiest way that one can explain something to something, if it was given to specifics that they would understand. So your position that you have there with the expendable money that the people have, if you linked a trickle up story to a specific person, then the other people out there would be able to understand that more, because they're the ones that don't have the £200 anymore.
I think there's two things about this. The one is that you make the point about what people are hearing about, a fear story about 7.6 billion. I was on a television debate on Monday night, and the one comment I regret I didn't use was to actually as I was getting pushed on £7.6 million, that I didn't say to the television audience that the people who were making the accusation to me about 7.6 billion are currently presiding over a £98 billion deficit in the United Kingdom and a £1.5 trillion worth of debt, which is going like that. Right? So actually I'm accepting a wee bit of responsibility for not reminding people of some hard facts that they need to hear about the current situation, because we're not living in some absolutely marvellous set of circumstances. Now the second point is about how we've got to get across the argument, the whole argument about increasing, expanding public expenditure, the 0.5% real terms that Ivan was talking about, can often be viewed as, oh my goodness, you're borrowing more just to invest in public services. We're trying to spark economic recovery, and that's the purpose of it, so that businesses will invest, people will spend, will make a contribution, and it's about trying to encourage people to think this is a positive about actually getting the economy moving, rather than how it's portrayed of somehow we've got, in the vested interest of a number of the, led by the Conservative Party, but the Labour Party and the Liberals are both going along with it, of this absolute necessity to have austerity. There's no requirement to have austerity. There's a choice to be exercised. Right, we better move around it.
David? Just to pick up on the general theme of the going on from what Ivan showed us in the graphs, etc., which is great, because I know Ivan's done a great job of making it economics palatable over the last couple of years, if that's possible. But it's kind of funny. There's 2 points as well. Just like to quick question, make the points. It's funny, when you talk about the 7 billions or whatever you raised there, Michelle, is that the opposition always try to frame that as in something that's existing, because if we were to that as as an independent country, or even with full fiscal autonomy, the whole shape of the thing changed. The whole frame of that billions or whatever calculation changes, but they don't seem to recognise or to let on the fact that actually changes. Therefore, the 7 billion will be something else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a moving target, and I'm just picking a number out there based on an IFS report that was based on some stuff that OBR did. Surprise, surprise. So it's and it's a political game, and that's what it's all about. And it's just to try and, same as during the referendum, that Kennedy went on the economic stuff to try and scare people, and it's the same strategy. They've picked up this full fiscal autonomy, put a number on it, and try and scare people on it. But I think two things. People have come a long way in the resistance to that kind of stuff, because it's not new. People hearing it all last year, and a lot of people, 45%, were resistant to it. And the other thing, of course, is that last year we were running 10-15% behind, trying to catch up. It's on the other foot now. We're running 15 points ahead, and they're trying to catch us. And the way they're going about it, by trying to scare people, isn't a very effective strategy.
I was just going to say though that, and then also in that 7 billion, and as John pointed out there, my old friend John there, this is the man that's, I think, that's the only finance minister that's balanced the books recently in the whole of Europe. So I think we're in safe hands.
But the thing about the balance the book thing, Steve, is that, you know, my opponents say, oh, you've got to do that by law. That is absolutely correct. I've got to do it by law. I've still got to do it though. You know, the law just doesn't magically make it all happen. It's got to happen, which is the kind of rather blunt point I'd make. The gentleman at the back was kind of.
Yeah, two things again. One of my friends recently said to me that having the Labour Party in charge of the economy is like having rogue cowboy builders that have trashed your house several times and inviting them back to have another go at trashing it. Now, we're trying to keep the Labour Party and others that are dishonest honest. We're trying to keep people who are out for themselves to apply some principles. But also, we have to make people that are incompetent in some way, at least semi-competent. I'd like you to address that challenge. And the other one is the question of inequality. I couldn't agree more. The richest 1% have doubled their wealth since the financial crash, when everyone else has got poorer. The question, it's no longer enough to stop at 300 times the average wage for chief executives. It has to be reversed back down to the 10s, 12s, 15 times the average wage. How do we do that? And is a possible weapon in doing it applying the Proceeds of Crime Act to financial misconduct to allow unlimited seizures of assets, both of individuals and companies, and thus make sure that the money that they are stealing repeatedly through financial LIBOR fiddling, I could go on, you could go on my list 1,000 of them, make sure that that money comes back into rightful hands and doesn't stay in the hands of the people that have stolen it from us.
The first point on the Labour Party, the thing is that we've got to use our influence, and to use our influence effectively to ensure that our priorities and our aspirations are properly and fully met by the decisions that are taken and the way in which we shape those decisions. And we've got to ensure that we use our political scale of our political influence within the House of Commons to require certain standards and activities of approach that guarantee that we can do that we can secure the type of progress and outcomes that we want to secure. So that's about acting wisely to hold whatever incoming UK government is formed to account, and it's on that basis that the First Minister has set out how we would use our voting influence to ensure that we kept the Labour Party honest as she has described it, and to make sure that's properly and effectively undertaken. I think the other point you raise on the inequality issues and relationships in that respect, I think there's some of this you might be able to address by regulation in terms of relationships to salaries, you know, and that certainly should be explored. There's another element of it which is about a cultural attitude. What is acceptable in our society as the difference between what an average salary is and a leading salary is? What are our cultural values about that? And I think we need to, because I think it is difficult. I can't give you a credible and tangible explanation as to why those differentials are as great as they are. So we've got to lead a process of changing that culture. Then thirdly, on financial crime, financial crime should be what it is, financial crime, and it should be pursued with a vengeance about it. You know, if somebody was to cheat on the benefits, they'd have the forces of authority after them instantaneously, quite rightly, because it's
not happening? Why is
well,
it nobody
I can't give you an explanation on behalf of the regulatory authorities that do these things, but that's, you know, to me that's the standards that should be applied and considered in the process. Now, one of the things that we've decided, we've got these new tax powers, and one of the questions I had to resolve was what was going to be our stance in relation to the question of tax avoidance. And I have a tax advisory forum that advise me on all these questions, and there are tax experts on there. You know, a gentleman from the Chartered Institute of Taxation who's the Office of Tax Simplification, who's a fantastic advisor to me on these questions, and there's business representatives and all this. But there's also a member from Help the Aged, and someone from the Poverty Alliance, and someone from the Young Scot organisation, because I wanted to be advised by a broader body politic rather than traditional informed interests. And it was interesting when we explored this question. We literally put a chart up on the wall about tax compliance, which is what we should all be doing, tax evasion, which is illegal, and then the big area in the middle is tax avoidance. And we had a debate about, well, where do we want to be on that in Scotland with these new taxes? Do we want to be encouraging tax avoidance by saying we'll design these schemes that can allow you to avoid your tax liability? And I decided to take it right up to avoidance, evasion, and to say our standards on tax compliance will be the highest we can possibly make them, other than what's against the criminal law. So the expectation, the cultural expectation in Scotland, is that you pay your taxes in a tax compliant fashion. You don't find ways, elaborate ways and mechanisms of avoiding your tax liability. And that's the culture that we're now taking forward in the whole process.
There's a gentleman at the back. What I want to do, because I'm conscious of time, it's particularly John's time, can I take 3 final questions? You there, sir, at the front, and you at the back, and one more? Okay, right, so if you could just ask your question, we'll try and frame them into one, because I'm conscious of everybody's time.
My question is, I run a business, and I have to say, if SNP want to get my vote, they're going to have to convince me that a fairer society doesn't equate to anti-business thinking. I'm really concerned for that in Scotland. I think that there's a sort of growing view that a kind of fairer society, because of the banking crisis, so it somehow equals anti-business. Business is bad, and so what's going to happen or what's your position on how to have a flourishing, growing, healthy business sector that's well perceived, and that not complemented by a public sector that's growing somewhat faster than the private sector, and therefore, you know, the private sector's being squeezed further and further and further to create fairness, inverted commas, which in my view is just not really a realistic proposition.
Okay, and could take your question as well, sir?
I know that we covered one side of the banking system, all these wages and everything, but the other side is that since the crisis, the money is now being released to businesses by the banking system, and I want to know how much of that is in Scottish Government's remit, and the rest of it, what will be our MPs once they go there, what is your perception of giving them guidance, or we can make that better, because it's very, very difficult. I mean, sometimes the banks are bringing good businesses who are making profit, and they are starving of them funds, and they just have to go to the wall.
Yeah. And your final question,
just a quick one. I'm half Norwegian, Ivan. I just said that once. I said my Norwegian relatives speak better English than most of my relatives over here. But just one quick comment. We were there at the referendum, and we postally voted yes, by the way, and the Norwegian media and my relatives were horrified that we had voted no. And the other comment they made is they were horrified that David Cameron was speaking down to the Scottish people. That was the perception in Norway at the time.
That's good to hear.
And that they have a definitely lower level between the top and the bottom, and that's what we should have.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so
the gentleman's point at the back, I would I'd hate for there to be a perception that somehow we're anti-business, because we don't create wealth in this country without a vibrant and strong business community. So the type of things that we've done, for example on the small business bonus or the investment in skills training, are all designed to try to ensure that we've got a business sector that can actually get a benefit out of the decisions that government takes to create greater prosperity. The tackling of inequality, to me, is actually now a central economic issue for us, because when I was visiting a company the other week there in the hospitality sector, and the company has decided, much against the prevailing wind in the hospitality sector, to pay the living wage to their staff. And the managing director of the company was able to say to me, and that's, I was there to kind of hail this as a support to the government's agenda on equality, but he was able to marshal in front of me an absolutely fantastic business argument for doing it. His staff turnover was down, his productivity was increased, his reliability of staff participating in the business was all up, because they were getting, so in his bottom line, okay, he'd taken short-term strain of increasing his salary bill, but the long-term benefit, not even the long-term benefit, the sort of medium-term 3-month benefit of it was positive for his company. So the type of approach we're trying to take is a partnership approach, to say to business, look, there are things that we can do without forcing business to do certain things that will actually be inherently better and stronger for the economy. And the type of way that we envisage the increase in public expenditure being undertaken is not just to create a larger public sector, it's to create the conditions that enable us to grow a stronger economy. And that's what comes about by the use of our investment resources. When I shifted operational resources out of government and into capital expenditure projects, I had my critics. They said you should be spending that on increasing budgets for the public sector for operational expenditure. And my judgment was I would get more impact if I transferred that money into capital projects and we built more houses or we built more transport projects. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that in the strength of gross domestic product within Scotland. So the decisions that we take are designed to create the best conditions possible in which business can thrive, and that will underpin our judgments. The gentleman's question here about the banks, we have no scrutiny or control over the banks, none whatsoever. It's all done by the Prudential Regulatory Authority in the acting on behalf of the UK Government and the Bank of England. So we have no locus. However, we do undertake a regular discussion with the banks about the access to finance that's available, so that we can be assured that companies are able to gain access to lending resources to boost their economic performance as a consequence. And we'll continue to do that. And obviously we can, my colleague Stuart Hosey, who up until the election was the MP for Dundee East, was a member of the Treasury Select Committee in the House of Commons, and Stuart's been very actively involved in the scrutiny of banking practice within the Treasury Select Committee, and is regarded, I think, as a very informed and astute commentator and scrutineer of all these questions.
Yeah, just from a business point of view, couldn't agree with you more. I've seen it all over the place, the bank's lack of willingness to invest in business. When you've got some money in the bank, they're your best friend and they want to talk to you all the time, but as soon as you've got a problem, you need some money, they're nowhere to be seen. In actual fact, I think there's been cases that have come to light, and I've kind of seen it through some of the dealings I've had with the banks, where they're actually incentivised to put businesses under to some extent, because that's where they maximise their fees on the exit. And they can only get so much out of you through a normal loan process, but as soon as you start defaulting, their charges go up and up and up exponentially. So it's a ridiculous and outrageous situation, and it really does hold business back. How you fix it in the context of where we are today, very difficult just from a Scottish Government point of view, but as we gain more powers, then it's something obviously we'd want to, I think, would be very beneficial to deal with. And in terms of the question at the back, I think there's this kind of left-right thing that kind of is historically gone on in the UK. If you look at other countries, Scandinavian countries, other countries in Europe, there's much more of a understanding that business and social development need to move forward, and they're not polar opposites. They're very much together you've got to incentivise business, incentivise entrepreneurship for people to do stuff to generate wealth, and have a coherent social policy that manages how you spend that. So that they're very much tied up. In this country, I think we've got to the point where we see them as polar opposites. But as I say, in a lot of countries you go to, it's not really seen like that at all. And I think that's where we should be heading as a direction, rather than where we are just now.
We just started, just at the gent in the corner there, there's 6 members of Business for Scotland here tonight, at least. I can count the audience. I've got too much coffee, so I'm not falling asleep yet. So there's still 6 people in the audience here from Business for
One
Scotland.
interesting thing also about
that shows you the commitment that we have to the business sector.
the Norwegians actually have a view. They share the view of Carnegie about highs and lows in companies. I think it's about 20 to 1. And Carnegie and JP Morgan also share that view. And one of the ways that Norwegians have done this is you can go to any library in Norway and look up anybody's tax. Here in this country it's anonymous what people earn. In Norway it's not. So if you earn 2 or 3 million a year, the people around you know.
It's an interesting point of culture. Can I make one last point? What the gentleman said there about the Norwegian experience and what's the mood of Scotland? I think one of the things that I was 15 in the 1979 referendum, and one of the reasons I joined the Scottish National Party just shortly after that referendum was that the mood in the country was so bleak and down. I felt I had to do something to try to help lift it back up, and I hope I've spent the last 36 years of my life has kind of somewhat contributed to that process. But the mood in the country is completely different post referendum last September to what it was like in 1979, and that's a measure. We are living in a fundamentally different country, as a more buoyant country, a more optimistic country, a country that I think is a lot more perceptive about some of the issues and perspectives that were getting put to people as being the kind of the holy grail during the referendum, and that's something to be very optimistic and buoyant about.
Well, I suppose what I'd like to do is to wind it up there. Most appreciative to John in particular giving up his time. Ivan's come up from Southampton today, and to just reflect on that, it is indeed a measure of where we are, that we're sitting in this kind of small campaign hub and we're talking about full fiscal autonomy, we're talking about austerity, all the lexicon of our language, our education levels across society are so much better and so much different to where we were a few years ago. And just to pick up your point at the end there, sir, I've spent 28 years in the business, and here I am, hopefully about to embark on a political career, and I consider it vital that people who are doing that job, you'll see Tommy Shepherd standing in Edinburgh East, who also runs the Stand Comedy Club. We've got another chap down in the Borders. A lot of people stepped up to the plate in the SNP because actually we think we've got something to contribute about how we shape things going forward. So I'd have to say a huge thank you to John for giving up his time tonight, and to Ivan, and I hope you enjoyed it and see it as a feature of how we want to shape our Scotland going forward, shape the UK, and business has got a pivotal part to that. So thank you very much to both of you.
Right, that's all for tonight. Thanks for sticking with it. It was very ropey networking conditions at the beginning. I was using their own internet connection in-house. Seemed to be fine at the beginning, but just dived. And then it was awkward in the middle of the Deputy First Minister's presentation to clamber about, switching to my router. But as I say, thanks for sticking with it. And I was also juggling with new equipment to try and pick up the best sound rather than just going straight from the tablet. Introduces a bit of interference. Still on a learning curve with that. Okay, so hope you enjoyed that. See you next time. Peace.